The New Era, Chapter 41. Species, shiphead Alina. Species, Urukai. Species description, reptilian humanoid, no tail, 5'3", or 1.6 meters average height. 135 pounds or 61 kilograms average weight. 105-year life expectancy. Ship, RSV Loalana. Fights with honor. Location, unknown. Firing, Bruna sighed. Maybe we'll actually get the kill this time, Kryn said, with an optimistic tone. Target destroyed. See? By the Mac round of a U.S. destroyer. Ah. Well, we'll get them next time, I interjected. I didn't believe a single word that came out of my mouth. In a way, our situation was kind of funny. I'd been worried that fighting to get us involved into the battle would get us all killed. Yet we were the safest and most bored that we'd ever been. Even listening to diplomats prattle on about the USS Thanatos would be more exciting than this. Shiphead, with all due respect, I feel like we're all way out of our league here, Kron said. Well, yeah, it took us a few decades to build up to the point where we could push the OU back a bit. Knowing what we know now, our successes were pretty much just luck, Kryn laughed. If all the ships that the OU had in the Milky Way came to us at once, we'd have been lucky to keep it at a stalemate. This, however, is a battle to end that war. We were never meant to be here. The United Systems just dragged us along for the ride. A murmur of disgruntled agreement washed over the bridge. Even I couldn't argue with her assessment. It would certainly be fair to say that the US had not been entirely prepared for this conflict when we dragged it into their space. But you wouldn't know it now, and the speed in which they had adapted was absolutely terrifying. With all of my experience with the humans, Alamari, Nunu, and Gaunt, I'd been under the delusion that our presence here would make a difference. I'd argued with my father, claiming that the US needed all the help they could get. But even after a week of combat, we hadn't managed to secure a single kill. Instead, we were maintaining a symbolic position within the fleet, unable to fight or be fought due to the deadliness of the ships around us. Shiphead, may I get us a little further away from the pack? Kron asked. And there it was, the question that I'd been dreading. I had expected days earlier, so I had a chance to practice my reply. Is our ego so bruised that we must actively risk our lives unnecessarily just to soothe it? I replied. The silence that fell aboard that bridge was my answer. There's no arguing that it's stupid, but each and every one of us were warriors at heart and needed to do something. I took a deep breath and released it in a sigh. So be it. Let us hunt then. There were a few quiet celebratory sounds from the crew as Kron began to break formation. I expected to receive some form of reprimand from the United Systems forces, but none came. Instead, I watched some of the ships make way for us on the TAC map. It brought a small smile to my face when I realized that they understood. I've located a good target, Kryn said. They're banged up, but still capable of putting up a fight. Must have taken a glancing blow, I replied, or taken a round that travelled through another ship or two. Getting us into position, Kron reported. Kryn worked on her terminal, and the TAC map highlighted the position of our target. It also showed US ships disappearing and reappearing, using their FTLDs to make small jumps and avoid incoming fire and get better firing positions, a tactic which I desperately wished we could imitate. That's not to say the United Systems hadn't been extremely kind to the RSV Loalana. Our ship had received every upgrade that the treaty between the US and the Republic would allow us. So much so that it's entirely possible that the Loalana has been made into the most advanced Republic space vessel to ever exist. Even so, our technology was still several generations behind even the most outdated US ship. The TAC map that had been installed on our bridge was perfectly capable of displaying tracked projectiles, yet our sensors were only capable of picking up projectiles of certain mass, only displaying smaller ones when they were far too close for combat. An issue which came to my attention as the ship we were hunting began to fire at us. "Evasive maneuvers," I ordered. Kron fired our deck thrusters and barely managed to move us out of the way of the OU ship's initial volley. The Mac rounds ripped past us at speeds which would have surely disabled our shield. Then came the missiles, but those were much less of a threat. "Point defense lasers firing," Gwynner reported. "They're holding up pretty nicely for being a patch job," Luna added. "I was worried that the US engineers had rushed things. Guess they really do just work faster than us." The OU's missiles exploded before they reached us, causing a brief period of interference with our sensors. Another issue that I was certain that the US didn't have to deal with. "Any chance of getting under the enemy?" I asked. No, shiphead, Kron replied. It's tracking us. Well, I suppose we'll have to track it right back. I want a firing solution. Yes, sir. I watched the lights for our port and bow keel thrusters turn green, indicating those thrusters were ignited. Our Mac soon aligned with the OU vessel, and we began to close while dodging incoming fire. The enemy ship was attempting to move away, but its bow thrusters must have been damaged by its earlier contact with the U.S. It would have to turn around to run away. A smile formed on my face for the first time since the battle began, and I thanked whichever sun was watching over us. We had them. I patiently counted down until we were within range of the Mac firing position. Fire! I ordered. Firing, Gruner replied giddily. Several pieces of ordnance rapidly departed our ship and began to make their way through the void to their destination. Our Mac disabled their shields, our guns overwhelmed their PDLs, and our missiles ripped open their hull. A cheer rang out through the ship, but it quickly died out. A hull breach doesn't defeat an OU ship. Target their reactor, I ordered. Already on it, sir, Krin replied. Recharging Mac, Gruner added. They shouldn't be able to fight back, Luna said. That salvo had to have damaged their Mac. Maintain evasive maneuvers, I chuckled. Just in case. Kron shifted from port to starboard thrusters to throw off any attempts at a firing solution from the enemy. Luna let out a low whistle as another Mac round went sailing past us, but I was busy watching our own Mac's charge indicator. Once it filled, I verified our firing solution. Fire! The round from the Max flew straight and true, and a moment later the enemy vessel disappeared from the tack map. Another more raucous cheer spread through the ship. It was only a single kill, but it granted us a reason for traveling across the universe to somewhere we had no business being. Even I let out a celebratory exclamation as I checked the tack map for any additional nearby targets. My victory died in my throat. An OU battleship had seen our fight and was heading our direction at full burn. It was shedding speed, which was an indication that it was actively seeking a firing solution. And we were the only ship that it could possibly be firing at. Shiphead, Krin panicked, seeping into her voice. I see it, I replied. What do we do? Gruner asked. Maintain evasive and try to get us out of here, Kron. Yes, shiphead. Aside from turning tail, the only thing we could do was ask for help. It would undermine our accomplishment, but that's far better than losing our lives in a fight that we would never had a chance of winning. I reached for a comms console and paused when it sounded an incoming fleet comm hail. All units stand down, a familiar raspy voice said over the comms. Everyone froze at Omega's unexpected order. I glanced at the attack map and noticed that the battleship had come to a stop. There weren't any projectiles being exchanged between the other ships either. Congratulations, shiphead Alina, Omega said. The crew of the RSV Loelana secured the last kill of this conflict. In space, at least. What do you mean? I asked. I have secured control of the Omni-Union's forces, and the Marines have secured their leadership. The grand vessel is ours. The war is over. We've won. We've won, I repeated, stunned. After all this time. After so many lives. We won. Just like that. Not the phrasing that I would use. Even if things were relatively calm out here, there were some rather intense battles aboard the grand vessel. Right. I am sure many of your soldiers lost their lives in those battles. Definitely more than I would have liked, Omega replied. However, we lost far fewer than we believed that we would. I see, I trailed off, building the nerve to ask the only work of the question on my mind. So did you find out why the OU was doing all of this? Grin casually asked. The suddenness of the question caught me off guard, and I stared at my intel head with my mouth agape until Omega began to speak. We did. Turns out it was a religion gone awry in the worst way possible. The AI said in its bitter tone, the founder of the Omni-Union was a long-dead eunuch known as the Omnifier. He was a slave owned by the master of science and discovered entropy during his service. However, he misunderstood that discovery and believed a semi-deific being that he called the Urizethron was stealing energy from our universe. The scientific mind of the time seemed to understand that entropy is a simple matter of equilibrium, and dismissed this eunuch's findings. A slave rebellion was likely already brewing. But the Omnifier's impassioned claims of an extra-universal devourer lit a spark that led him to leading the rebellion. Must have succeeded, I said. Indeed. The Omnifier overthrew the government and began a religion, the Omni-Union, dedicated to defeating Erasithron. That was the purpose of the Grand Vessel. We actually got quite lucky, because once the hull was complete, it would have been armed to the teeth. We wouldn't have stood a chance against it.
What do you think they would have done once they figured out that the Erasithron was a myth? Kirin asked.
There were definitely those who realized that already. Those that spoke up were executed for heresy and dissidence, of course. However, I found it particularly interesting that the Omni-Union was unable to defeat Erasithron, which would have definitely been the case due to its non-existence. The Grand Vessel would instead serve as an extra-universal habitat. It indicates a possibility that someone with power within the OU knew that the Omnifier was wrong. But to answer your question, given the political similarities to historical governing entities, it is likely that they would eventually have attempted to conquer the universe.
I see, I said. So, what now?
Now we get you home. United Systems will maintain control of the Grand Vessel and will lead efforts to rehome its denizens.
All by yourselves?
No, but it's unclear as to how we're going to accept help at the moment. There are many who are wary of the Republic and don't want you catching up to us technologically. Personally, I don't think it'll make much difference. Even if Republic ships' technology caught up to the U.S., there are still several technological and tactical advantages the U.S. will maintain.
You being one of them, of course.
Indeed. Back on the subject of getting you home. Your status as a diplomat has been restored, so you'll likely be forced to attend several victory parties.
I'm looking forward to it, I replied sarcastically.
I thought you might, Omega chuckled. I have other matters to attend to now. We will meet again, Shiphead Alina.
I nodded absent-mindedly, and the comm disconnected. My mind reeled from the variety of feelings I felt regarding our victory. The war itself began over one of the stupidest reasons I'd ever heard. With the exception of certain dropped hat, if enough people had been willing to speak reason and enough people had been willing to listen, countless tragedies would have been avoided. And even now it was over. We still had plenty of clean-up to do. But we survived, and we ended the threat to our galaxy and all the other galaxies that the Omni-Union threatened. That, at least, was something to be glad for. Let's go home,
I said with a heartfelt smile. End of chapter.
I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.